Okay, so today we're going to do an RNA extraction on a Covid-19 potential sample. So we're just going to do one. We're doing it in a single cuvette. This is a dummy sample here. This is not a real live COVID one. When we talk about health and safety, there are a few things that we need to mention. So you can see at the moment that I have a gown on, which doesn't leave this room. I'm gloved when handling everything. Everything that I handle here is in a Class 2 cabinet, which, as we can see, was validated last week. One of the things to note on this test is in 2030 we only use swabs that have a DNA, RNA transport medium, which kills the active virus and preserves the RNA. Therefore, there should never be an incident of us ever receiving live COVID-19 virus into our lab. However, we would always take every precaution to pretend that it does, to make sure that we apply the best health and safety that we can. Therefore, any swabs will only ever be opened within the cabinet. When you're using the Class 2 cabinet, this is our important area here. We mustn't have any of our equipment blocking this, otherwise it won't be effective. Okay, so 5 minutes prior to when you start work, there are two reagents that we need to take out of the freezer because we need to allow them to come to temperature. So we've got PK, which goes into the reaction, and we've got our internal extraction control. So we need to give these at least 5 to 10 minutes, and before you use them you need to make sure that obviously they're defrosted. Okay, so with the samples, if we read the instructions from the kit, the extraction kit, it talks about taking 200 microlitres of sample, which is what the NHS do in the UK. However, because we're screening at the COVID network, we actually take 400 microlitres of sample. So that means that we have to double all of the consumables out of the extraction kit. So first of all, typically it would say use 400, but I'm going to use 800 because of my doubling of sample. I'm going to set my pipette to 800. I'm going to go into the buffer. You can notice from this pipette tip that it's filtered. That's to stop anything going into my pipette and contaminating that could run into another sample. Now, the technique on the buffer, rather than reverse pipetting, I'm going to go down to the first stop, place my pipette in, suck up, transfer, place the lid back on, and I'm going to discard my tip. Make sure when you discard your tip that it goes into a container where it can't splash back or cause any aerosol within the cabinet. The buffer solution is the first solution that goes in. This will effectively, if there was any loose RNA, any loose virus in that sample, will effectively give it a double kill. So, the next stage is to add PK. Okay, now for this we need to use a different pipette. If I can get the right one here. We're using a 4 microlitres of this one. I don't need to spin this, so I'm going to go to these micro pipetters. Now this one is a bit fiddly. The reason being is it's such a small volume that it's actually quite difficult to get off of the cuvette. So we're going to open this, making sure I don't touch the insides here. I don't want to contaminate anything. Again, no reverse pipetting. This equipment is very, very, very expensive and I don't want to waste any. And I also, if you reverse pipette and you have bits left, you must never ever put them back into those jars. You will contaminate them. So again, down to the press, into the container, suck it up. Now, it's going to be very hard for you to see this on the video, but basically when I go to dispense this, you'll notice that a very, very, very tiny bubble comes out that will not drop off on its own. So very, very carefully, I'm going into the cuvette. I'm going below the lid line so I don't lose it. And very gently, I have just made the bubble on the end of liquid touch the side wall, the pipette has not touched the sidewall, or I'd have to remove the pipette and get a fresh one for the next sample, and that's just added that in there. So fiddly, if you do accidentally touch the cuvette, dispose of the pipette and get a new one. Okay, so the next stage that I need to do is I need to add from here my internal extraction control. Now this is a really important stage. So the internal extraction control, I have to get this product from this vial through to the PCR. If this doesn't record in the MPCR, my test has failed. So again, we're not going to spin this up. Reason being is we don't want to damage any RNA. We're going to turn this down to 20. Okay, we're now going to swap. We're going back onto these pipettes here. Again, you'll notice that they're filtered. So this protects the pipetta from the samples. Okay, so I'm going to very, very, very carefully open that. As you can see, I'm holding it. Again, down to the first stop on the pipette. In, pipette up, and pipette in. Again, be careful when flicking your tips off that you don't create any aerosol. Okay, so my next stage at this point is to add the mag beads into the kit. So how this kit works, obviously there are different ways of doing extraction. The method that we use here is mag bead, which we find more easier, especially using nasopharyngeal. You can tend that silica gel columns can get blocked up. So effectively what we're going to do now is to put our mag beads in. Now, important part, whenever you get your mag beads, they tend to separate in the cuvette. One thing that's really prudent to note, that we never use out of the main one, okay? We always dispense it into a smaller volume. Therefore, if you ever get any problems with your PCR, you don't waste the whole reagent by having to throw it away. It's better to dispense an aliquot into a smaller vial, that if you did think there was a contamination, that you can bin. So I've got some of my mag beads in here. The most important thing here is to spin these up. They do separate even in the cuvette. So I give those a really, really good spin. It's important to note as well that if I was doing loads of these all in one go, I would actually need to spin this probably every 3 to 4 samples, because it would even start separating even during that period of time. So again, I'm using 20 microliters. I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to dispense. Again, I don't want to waste this, it's very expensive. I'm going down to the stop. I'm going in. I'm sucking up. And I'm going to place that. Be patient here and just allow that droplet just to come off, which it will on its own. Again, right in. And lid that up. Okay, so my next stage now is to dispense my sample into the reaction. So for this, obviously my pipetta has been on 800 from when I did the buffer. I now need to take this down to 400. So as COVID has been designated as a hazard group 3, obviously this laboratory here is hazard group 2, but obviously we've got the added benefit now that we're working in a cabinet, and we've applied the health and safety of using RNA DNA shield to ensure that there's no live virus. We still don't want to take any risks. So one way of risking things is to homogenise samples where you create aerosol. So for this, we're going to mix the swab within the tube. So, oh no, stop. Okay, so health and safety wise, we're going to use first of all a long pipette tip here, okay? Again, it's filtered. This is probably the most critical one. I don't want COVID RNA in my pipetta. So again, I've got a filter. You can see that the tip is a lot longer on this one. That's because I don't want my pipetta to come into contact with the liquid in my sample. So I don't want to homogenise this or create aerosol, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into my tube here and I'm going to press up and down, and that's going to just mix my sample, okay, without me having to create any aerosol. So then I'm going to go down to the bottom, I'm going to suck up 400 millilitres and take that out. Got a couple of bubbles on top there, but that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, and now that swab is finished with, I'm now going to put my 400 into my sample and dispose. Obviously, this is the most critical one. This is the one that could be contaminated. I don't want to be waving this about in the cabinet. Very short and sharp, straight into that pot. Again, make sure it's right in. We don't want to splash anything back. And this swab is now finished with. Okay, so now in my cuvette, I've got my buffer solution, which will kill any loose, any live virus if it survived. The swab transport medium. I've now got my my PK in there. I've got additionally in there my mag beads, which the principle of the mag beads is to get the RNA of the COVID-19 to stick to the beads. That's the whole point of putting them in there. And I've now got my 400 microlitres of sample. So I'm now going to close this cuvette, okay? And I'm going to mix it at 1200 RPM. And just mix those together. So once I've mixed that, I just give it a quick mix on my welly mixer. I then put it into here. Going to put it on a plate spinner here. Okay, I'm going to set this to 1200 RPM for 10 minutes on the timer. So after 10 minutes at 1200 RPM of mixing the beads, I'm now going to transfer my cuvette back into a magnetic rack. So I'm going to place that there. So basically what's going to happen is that my magnets here are going to stick to the back of the magnet. The rest of the fluid will come to the front. Okay, so this section is what I call the wash stages. So basically what we want to do now is to clean those beads up. So during the 10 minutes on the mixer, all of the RNA has come into contact and bound to the beads. I now want to remove everything else that I'm not looking for and clean these beads up. So I'm left with pure RNA on my beads. So first of all, I need to use a series of washes. Now for the Zymo kit, this is unusual, it has an extra wash. So it has 4 washes. Wash 1, wash 2, and then I do 2 ethanol washes, ethanol 1 and ethanol 2. So starting with wash 1, I'm going to put my pipette onto 500. Okay, I'm going to take one of my pipette tips here. I'm going to loosen that off. And I'm going to uncap my pipette tube. Now you're going to notice a technique here where I'm going to steady the bottom, okay, and I'm going to undo the lid. Now, these lids are quite firm, and by doing that, it unsteadies the magnet. So you need to wait until they do it. Typically, if I'm doing a row of them, I will undo all the lids first, allow them a minute to settle back to the magnet, okay? So, once we're happy that that is undone, the beads are settled back to the plate, I'm going to go in and I'm going to remove the liquid. Now, I'm actually going to turn this up at this point because the amount of liquid at the moment in that cell has the 800 microlitres of buffer plus all the other bits. So I'm just going to turn that up a little bit here to about 900. And first of all, I'm not worried about the volume I'm taking out here. I'm just making sure I've got it all out without disturbing the beads. So I'm going to put my hand in and I'm going to keep my pipette to the front here of this cuvette. I'm also going to steady the cuvette with my thumb because I don't want to pull any beads off the magnet. So I'm just going to slide this pipette down into the bottom of the well. Okay, so one tip to make sure, which I sometimes do when I'm not being very careful, make sure you depress before you go in, or you'll create air bubbles and it'll overflow out the top. So press down, suck out. Now you need to watch this because there's more than your pipette can handle. So I'm going to extract that into there. Again, please don't splash, go nice and slowly. Okay, and I'm going back in. I can use the same pipette. However, if I accidentally clipped that bin that we put the pipette tips in, discard of the tip. If you've managed not to touch anything else, it's okay to go in and suck the rest out with it. When sucking out as well, especially on this stage, because you need to get 2 pipettes worth out, make sure that it never ever touches the filter. Okay, and there's a little technique here. If I had other ones empty, when I'm sucking out the waste, you never ever go over the other open ones. You would always come out, over, round and in. Okay, so it's good technique. So remember, when you're pipetting, if you've got multi ones open, we're not going to start wobbling over here with liquid in. So now going to go back down to the 500. Automatic pipettes are great here. So we're down to 500. Okay, and I'm going to put 500 microliters of buffer into here. Again, no reverse pipetting. Another tip, make sure that when you come in, you're depressed, you don't blow air into there. Okay, so you literally suck up and in. Okay, again, in, no splashes caused. Screw the lid firmly back on and remove. I've finished with wash 1 now. I'm going to put that in. I'm then going to homogenise this, okay, again at 1200 RPM. Going to give that a spin. Make sure that's really nicely mixed. Okay. Again, I need to leave that for a minute to settle back to the magnet. What you find is if you're doing 8 or 12 in a row, by the time you get there and you've done all of them, it will be enough time. But because I'm only doing 1 at the moment, I'm going to wait for 1 minute. After my 1 minute, I'm now on 500 what I've put in. I obviously need more to suck it all out and make sure it's all removed. So I'm going to go up to about 800 and take a clean pipette. And again, I'm going to be really careful. I've got to undo this lid. So I'm going to steady the tube. I'm going to lift it up. Okay, and that's steadied against the magnet. And I'm going to wait until, to make sure no beads have come off. If you lose beads, you lose your RNA and the test will fail. So now I'm going to go in again. I'm going to depress the air outside. If you depress it in, it's going to bubble up and go everywhere. I'm going to angle it towards the front of the cuvette, and I'm going to slide right down to the bottom this time, and I'm going to suck all of that liquid out. After that, I'm going to get rid of that, again making sure I don't cause any splash, and this time I'm going to put wash 2 in, exactly the same as before. Change my pipette down to 500. Clean pipette tip. Remember, between samples, always use a clean pipette tip. If you accidentally forget and go in, you will cross-contaminate the samples. So wash 2. Again, depress the air outside, never blow bubbles in the reagents. Down, suck up, dispense in, discard of tip. Make sure that's firmly screwed on. If you ever make a mistake and you accidentally go back into something, or you think you've contaminated it, discard it. It will wreck the whole of your next samples and whoever's after you. I'm now going to place the lid firmly down on the cuvette, and again I'm going to spin it at 1200 RPM to give that a really good mix. Okay. Okay, and again, I've got to wait for those beads to settle, but I'm going to take that lid off now and wait for it to settle, because obviously the lid just causes disruption to the magnet. So we're going to just wait for 1 minute while that just settles back. We're now on to ethanol 1 wash. Okay, and it's exactly the same as the other 2 washes. Okay, the first thing we've got to do is suck out what we've put in off the other wash. So we're going to go up to about 800 there. We're going to take that tip. We are going to steady the bottom of the cuvette with my thumb. I'm going to slide down the outside, the side of the tube nearest to me, slide right down into the bottom and suck out. There we go. You can see I'm just still releasing that air as I pull up to make sure it's all come out. And again, I'm going to put myself onto 500 now, because I'm going to put my first ethanol wash in. Fiddly. Make sure you get yourself an electronic one. Okay, and again, depress down before I go in. Don't want any air bubbles. Suck up ethanol into the tube. Remove without causing splash. Firmly put your lid back on. Remember your aseptic technique at all times. I'm going to take that off and I'm going to spin that at 1200 RPM. Give that a really, really good mix. Then we're going to place that back onto the mag stand. And then going to hold that firmly against the magnet. I'm going to open it. I'm going to wait for those beads to settle back. And I'm now on ethanol wash 2. And again, it's exactly the same. I'm going to go up to remove all of the last ethanol out. Wait my 1 minute to make sure my beads are sucked to the back. I'm going to go slide down the front. I'm going to suck up, and a really good technique to be doing is to depress all the way to the bottom and then just keep releasing. You can see the air bubbles coming up as I'm sucking out, and I'm still sucking up as I come out. Okay, and discard that. And then I'm going to go back down to my 500. Okay, and I'm going to go into ethanol 2. Again, just depress down, get the air out outside the jar. I'm repeating myself, but it's really important. Down, dispense in, remove. Okay? And I've finished with that. So now I need to spin this up. Again, 1200 RPM, same as all the others. Give that a really, really, really good spin. That's the last of the washes. Okay, so again, exactly the same. I'm going to steady that tube there with my finger. I'm going to lift that off. Okay, and I'm going to wait to make sure all the beads do. Now, one of the things that I always do when I'm extracting is that when I'm doing the sucking out what I've put in, the previous wash, I always just have a look in that pipette tip just to check that there's no cloudiness and I've not accidentally sucked beads up, or just not concentrated and caught something, or pulled that cuvette off and sucked the beads up. You can see when you've done it, you'll get like a slightly cloudy brown in your cuvette, in your pipette tip, and if that happens, you need to put it straight back in, wait again for the minute till it re-firms at the back. So my bit now, I need to suck this out. Now this is the last stage on the ethanol wash, and this stage is critical that we remove all the ethanol. We do not want ethanol going into our PCR. This will ruin the test. So at this point, we've got to make sure that all of that ethanol is out. If you can see as well, when we're using cuvette tubes, you can see that here we've got ethanol in the top lid. And what I do here is I go up, although there's only 500 microlitres of ethanol in there, I go up to over 1,000 at this point. Okay, I take my pipette tip, secure that on, and again, same technique. I secure it with my thumb. I'm going to slide down the front, but before I go in, I'm going to depress this all the way down. I'm going to slide right down to the bottom without disturbing the beads, and I'm going to suck that liquid up. And again, as I move up, taking all that ethanol with me, I'm still sucking up, so the ethanol goes. I'm then going to suck up out of that lid and discard, okay? So when I finished, I have thoroughly removed all of the alcohol from both the lid and the tube. If you don't remove it, it won't dry quick enough, you'll have wet beads, and your assay will fail. So at this point now, I set my timer for 10 minutes, and I allow this to air dry with the lid off in the cabinet. Okay, so after your 10 minutes has lapsed, if you have successfully removed all of the ethanol, this should be dry, these beads, okay? And again, remember the technique here. Go in with your pipette tip. Make sure it's over 1,000, even though you've got 500 microliters of ethanol in there. Depress it all the way down before you get into the bottom, suck it up, and as you pull up, just keep releasing that for some air bubbles, and then into the lid here and suck round. Make sure it's all gone. If it's not gone, this will still be wet, and what you will notice from this is that your beads will be very, very, very shiny black, okay? They should be, and you guys won't be able to see off the video, but effectively when you look in there, they should have started to dry, and you'll notice a slight colour change, or they've slightly dried. It should be 10 minutes if you've done the ethanol properly. If you haven't, you might want to work on your technique, or you might need to leave it for another 2 or 3 minutes. So the next stage is the final stage, which is when it will move over into the PCR cabinet. So what I'm going to do here now is I am going to change my pipette to 35, and I have some DNA RNA free water here. I'm going to add this water to my hopefully dry cuvette. Again, make sure, depress the air before you go in. When you go in, don't reverse pipette. Go down, depress the air outside to the stop, go in, suck out, into there, let's touch side there, in that one, firmly do your top up. Remember your aseptic technique when undoing and doing up jars. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my lid down, and here is my final bit. The first bit I've got to do, if you can see, my liquid comes to here, and there's still mag beads at the side. So the next part of this is to thoroughly, at 1200 RPM, is just get those mag beads well off the side. Make sure that's spun up well to remove all the stuff off the side. I shall then put it in there, okay, and that's ready to be transferred into the PCR cabinet.